Today I'll be talking about toddler dietary habits in Lebanon. My outlines is introduction, methodology, findings, limitations, recommendations, and conclusion. What is the role of nutrition and well-being of a toddler? First 2 years, as you saw yesterday, it's a period of a rapid growth, mainly between 9 and 2 years. Something special happens. The spurt is at that time. Sure, another spurt, it will be pre-pubertal age, but we'll be talking about the spurt, the first spurt in life. An amazing growth spurt in the first 3 years. Remember that 2 times his birth height will be achieved at 3 years of age. 5 times his weight, his birth weight, and 1 gram of brain per day to reach about 1,000 grams as we saw yesterday. Nutritional needs, as Dr. Hanan said, are much higher than adults. They are not many adults. Sure, they have 5 times smaller stomach, they need 5 times more iron, they need 7 times more vitamin D, and 3 times more essential fatty acids. But we do not know what is the current reality in Lebanon. Till NutriCheck came, who are supporting toddler nutrition, and they told us we should know and we should understand our toddlers' needs and our Lebanese toddlers' needs. Our major contribution and aim in the NutriCheck study, I'm one of the investigators. That is an evidence-based study, and this was sent for publication last week, before 1 week, was to handle the dietary intake of toddlers by assessing their food intake, conducting a proper analysis to detect whether there are areas of deficiencies or excesses in their daily food intake, and providing recommendations, if any. We'll see. What is NutriCheck program? It's a toddler educational and nutritional assessment program. Takes care of healthy toddlers between 1 and 3 years of age, used in primary health care center only, identifies areas of dietary risk, and helps healthcare professionals to focus discussion and active and advice for parents, and to publish these evidence-based studies. These were validated as part of a clinical survey on preschool children in Ireland. How did it work in Lebanon? A partnership was created with 3 investigators for protocol writing. 3 colleagues, Dr. Eli Aramoni, one of pediatric gastroenterology, with our friend and colleague, Dr. Bassem, Dr. Robert Sasi and Dr. Imad Shukur, who are neonatologists. IRB approval were taken from 2 universities, the Lebanese University and Bassem University. Training and engaging of 23 investigators, educating 450 toddlers in healthcare professional clinics, 250 food diaries forms were analyzed by chief dietitian, and the NutriTech validation tool, as I have said, was validated and submitted for publication to Journal of Comprehensive Pediatrics. The files included the following food samples. I will not mention all. Just see some samples. As for cheese, it was estimated as a small piece, estimated as for 2 fingers, equal to 30 grams. And as for yogurt, for example, one cup, estimated as 240 milliliters. For biscuits or chocolate, or they have to mention the الماركة تاعتهم يعني. And for toast, if it is small, bigger, or medium size. These are samples of Lebanese food visuals, were also in the booklet to show for parents to not get hard work. All these were mentioned. This is the diet recall sample file for breakfast, for lunch, for bread intake, and for snack. Tool for data analysis, nutritionist of Pro software. The nutritionist Pro software was used in order to get the best nutrient analysis of the 4 days diet recall for every file. Nut Pro contains more than 22,000 nutrients and is updated twice yearly by dietitians. Its peculiarity consists in allowing its user to enter diet recipes, menus, and meals that are not already available in it, such as Oriental cuisine or the like. Since we had to use the nutrient data analysis of Lebanese menu, and we had them already available in the software, it made our task easier to accomplish with a maximum of accuracy. This is the Pro software. The amounts were calculated and portions of the 4 days studied as such, and a sheet analysis was summarized in one sheet, then calculated how many proteins per day, carbohydrates and total fat, or for the 4 days. Just to remember that infant formula versus whole milk formula contains double protein, contains about double saturated fatty acids, contains a high amount of cholesterol, 0 amount in the infant formula, and contains less iron. For the daily recommended energy intake, they should have about 300 kilocalories per day for the ages between 1 and 3 years. They have to take vitamin A, not less than 300 microgram. I will not mention all, just to remember some of. Vitamin D, at least 600 should be supplied. Calcium, at least 700 milligrams per day, and iron, at least 7 milligrams per day. Findings. Knowing that the recommended energy intake for toddlers is 1,300 kilocalories per day, the 250 files were split into 3 categories. Where 450 files, we excluded the rest because or not mentioned adequately, or missing data, or missing some days not mentioned. What remained? Those below 1,200 kilocalories, first category. Second category, those between 1,200 and 1,400 kilocalories, and those above 1,400 kilocalories. What were the findings for the energy intake, macronutrients, micronutrients, and where were areas of concern? For the energy intake, majority, about 70%, had intake calories, average intake of 890 calories per day. Only 20%, they had calories intake between 1,200 and 1,400 calories per day. About 10%, they had calories intake more than 1,600. For the micronutrients, vitamin D, 100% of all toddlers are vitamin D deficient. They consume 0 vitamin D. Calcium, 70% of all toddlers are calcium deficient, and they consume less than the daily recommended intake of calcium, which should be 700 milligrams per day. For that categories of less than 1,200 calories, lack calcium and vitamin, and if you see, about 20%, they had less than 136 international units per day of vitamin D. And more than 80%, they had less than 600 milligram per day of vitamin C. These are for first category of less than 1,200. For the second category of 1,200, 400, 1,400 kilocalories per day, all of them were consuming less than 600 international units of vitamin D, and about more than 20%, they consume less than 167 international units. For those who are more than 1,400 kilocalories, consuming more than 1,400 calories per kilo per day, the vitamin D in this group was all of them less than 220 international units per day. For macronutrients, dietary fiber intake was significantly below reference range across all segments. For that of less than 1,200 calories, they had energy dietary fiber intake low in 40% and about 35% of this group, about 50% in the second group, and about 67% in the third group. Major findings, all of that, 98% of toddlers were far below their adequate intake of total fibers. Their intake of fruits and vegetables was very low. Regarding fats, for saturated fatty acid, monounsaturated fatty acid ratios were high in comparison with the polyunsaturated fatty acid, even for the toddlers with a very poor energy intake. Their fat intake, even it falls in the reference range, was high in the saturated fatty acid and consequently in the monounsaturated fatty acid. As for the milk intake, only for toddlers were still breastfed. Less than 2% were still on breastfeeding. 49 were drinking cow's milk, account for about 20%, and 197% were drinking infant formula, reaching about 80%. Why? Because following the pediatrician's advice and recommendations, mothers have become more and more aware of the importance of infant formula for her child's optimal growth. Before, they were using cow's milk before too much. Toddlers exceeding caloric intake by region, most of them were in Beirut or in North Akkar. Large number of toddlers exceed the recommended caloric intake in these privileged regions. Also in very deprived areas in Beirut, we know why. Too many parents are both workers and babies are consuming more snack foods, American foods. Also in very deprived areas such as in North Akkar, the excessive caloric intake was a bit higher, especially in fat percentage, because they rely more on fried foods along with the bread and cow's milk in their daily intake. We could also find among the 173 files of children with insufficient energy intake, 19 whose intake was below 650 kilocalories, 37.5%, and their energy intake was 50% below the recommended energy intake. We could attribute number of children with suboptimal energy intake to the following: or picky eaters, attention-seeking behavior child, or spoiled or capricious child, as shown by Dr. Hanan now. Some mothers commented that their children eat better at the kindergarten, ما بياكلوا منيح بالبيت, while others said that they eat better at home. 2 out of 4 days studied, the child has been having inadequate calories. The eligibility to enroll in the study being for healthy toddlers only, therefore failure to thrive children were not mentioned. All children investigated and studied were healthy children. Even an energy intake as low as 600 to 650 kilocalories had a percentage of carbs lower than 45% and percentage of fat higher than 40%. If we look at their 4 days diet recall intake, the few foods they consumed very rich in fat, such as a small chocolate bar, few slices of fried potatoes, and high-fat spreadable cheeses versus a small portion of bread. The same goes for those whose energy intake lies between the recommendation and the excessive intake categories, decreased carbs versus increasing fat. Very, very rarely the opposite was found, with increasing carbs and decreasing fats. What were our limitations? Were more, but to summarize, inaccurate reporting of the food intake, and this were excluded from the study, and portion sizes from the parents or the other persons feeding the child, like the grandmothers, the helpers, or at the kindergarten. Inability to get in touch with the moms in order to have some clarification about a few portions. What were our recommendations and suggestions? Stressing more on mothers to avoid fried foods, because even children with very low energy intake have a high level of fat percentage. Enriching the young child formula with vitamin D, preparing salads, vegetables, and legumes should be a priority to our daily food intake. Encourage physical activity because it helps burn calories in toddlers who exceed energy intake and favors more food intake in those who do not meet the requirements. A 10% overweight is considered high because at the age gaining weight is critical and favors the multiplication of fat cells, mainly with programming in early ages. It preconizes a steady increase in weight in the critical years, especially 7 to 8 years of age, prepubertal and pubertal age.